I'm Pastor Eric Butler.
And I'm co-pastor Cynthia Butler.
And we welcome you to the Joy of Life Ministries, where we say,
the joy of the Lord is our strength.
Consequence. But fire that is under control and fire that is purpose is among the daily necessities of life. Came over to the church early this morning because it got down to the 40s last night, and I went down to, came to the church about 6 this morning, went down to phase 1 to the fellowship hall, and I turned on the furnace, and I turned on the boiler, I turned on the pump, so that when y'all came in to cook breakfast early this morning, it wouldn't be so cold. And the reason why is because there was some fire in the furnace. So look at somebody and say, sometimes we need fire. Co-pastor Butler was in West Virginia this week, and I didn't feel like going out to eat, so I started cooking. I cooked 2 nights in a row, which has got to be some kind of recent record for me. But the reason I was able to cook such wonderful meals, and they were delicious, I enjoyed my own cooking, if I say so myself, is because I was able to light the oven and get some fire. I needed fire to be used in an appropriate manner to cook the meat, to cook the vegetables. I needed some fire. Look at somebody, say fire. If you look in the Bible, fire is a central element of the theophany, or the visible manifestation of God and his power and his authority throughout the Bible. The first evidence of fire in the Bible is after the fall of man, when the disobedience of Adam and Eve required God to put an angel with a flaming sword placed at the gates of the Garden of Eden. Fire was also there in Genesis chapter 15 when God appeared and confirmed his covenant with Abraham. God in Exodus chapter 3 verse 2 demonstrated his authority with fire at the burning bush that was not consumed. Exodus chapter 13 showed God demonstrating his power and authority with fire by leading the children of Israel with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire by night. If you turn over to Exodus chapter 19, the appearance of the Lord on Mount Sinai to Moses giving the law was done with the fire of God. You can look throughout the Bible and see numerous visible manifestations of the power of God through the use of fire. Somebody say fire. But beyond the visible manifestations of God was the impact of fire itself as it was used in worship. Look at somebody, say fire. It was used as a symbol of holiness. God himself said he's presenting himself as a consuming fire there in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 29. And Jeremiah said in Jeremiah chapter 23 that his word was like fire. Look at somebody, say fire. In Leviticus chapter 6, here in our scripture, we have the priestly regulations for the burnt offering. I find that the burnt offering was something to be examined and something to be explored. I shared some of this with you earlier in the year, because a fire was to be kept burning in the temple at all times, and none of the burnt offering was to be eaten, whether by the priests or the worshipers. Many of the other offerings, there was a portion that was to be taken out by the priests, and we know that Eli's son, co-pastor was talking about last Sunday, they did it inappropriately, and that's why they were sinful, and God had to expose judgment on them. But we understand that with the burnt offering, none of it was to be eaten, no matter who it was. The burnt offering was to be completely consumed, and the holy burnt offering, and the fact that it was supposed to be completely consumed, is evidenced by the fact that here in Leviticus, instructions are being given to say what to do with the ashes. You know you've burned up and you had a pretty good barbecue and all you got left over is some ashes. The name complete whole burnt offering was because that the fire was to consume everything. Look at somebody say everything. I feel like preaching already. The fire was to consume everything that was offered up. That throughout the night, the embers of the evening offering were to remain on the altar so that the fire could be kept burning. And so in the morning, when the priest would come back wearing the appropriate clothes, they would remove the ashes and dispose of them in a ceremonially clean place outside of the camp. But even with all of that, the priests were responsible to keep the fire burning on the altar at all times. Look at somebody, say fire. We love to keep the fire burning. The fact that the burnt offering, as it was being burnt up and was being called such, was regarded as an offering that was being ascended unto God through the smoke while being consumed. Now, the interesting thing is this burnt offering, if you study the Bible, was the most frequent form of sacrifice in Old Testament Israel. And in fact, if you study the book of Genesis, this is the one that really is mentioned almost all the time. If you look at the sacrifices offered by Abel in Genesis 4 and 3, it was a burnt offering. Look at what Noah did in Genesis 8, a burnt offering. Look at what Abraham did in Genesis 22, a burnt offering. Look at what happened in Exodus 10 and 25, burnt offering. The law of Moses, in fact, even talked about all the occasions in which a burnt offering and sacrifice was to be offered. He talked about the continual burnt offering. Somebody say, preach, Pastor. He talked about the burnt offering of every Sabbath, which was double the daily burnt offering. Then he talked about the burnt offering of every month. He talked about the burnt offering at the Passover, the burnt offering during the feast of the Pentecost, the burnt offering during the feast of the trumpets, the burnt offering on the day of atonement. And even when they had those special meetings, they had to come up with the burnt offering because it was signifying a time when everything that was not like God was completely consumed and burnt up. Look at somebody, say burnt offering. What I really like is that if you look at Leviticus, the Leviticus also talks about free will burnt offerings. They had to have daily offerings. They had to have the daily double offerings on Sunday and the offerings on all of the feasts. But then every now and then they said, if you just feel like a free will burnt offering, where you need to take something back to the fire and let the fire burn up something that's not like God, and you need to go back with the free will burnt offerings every now and then. Look at somebody and say, Lord, set us on fire.